Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January edition of EQUITOR Northstar. We hope the New Year resolutions are going well. And if not, please remember, trial periods can be as long as 30 days, so you can always go back. Thank you for joining us on this pleasant afternoon for the 8th iteration of the event. Like the brightest star in the night, every edition of Northstar features fireside chats with leaders of businesses who have broken new grounds in terms of their industries and categories to a new future. Some of the previous guests include Ms. Pervin Verma, trustee and erstwhile CEO, CRY Foundation, Mr. Madhavan Menon, Thomas Cook India, Sri Lanka and Mauritius, Mr. S. Nagarajan, and Mr. Shiv Kumar Sundaram, Group CEO, Bennett Coleman, Times Group. Today's theme, however, as you know, is world-class to worldwide, but why have it now? In the last 2 decades, we at EQUITOR have had the privilege for working with over 150 Indian business leaders with world-class mindsets. It is a story of Middlestands, which, as we know, are family businesses that are closely held but hold themselves to highest of global standards of product innovation, manufacturing, customer experience, employee engagement, and fiscal discipline, all of them self-imposed. This comes through quite vividly in the example that we shared with all of you in our last communication about Royal Enfield. As you know, that it was a brand that was almost written off, but now is a cult in 50 countries and became the best-selling motorcycle in the United Kingdom just last year. Our conversation today is about building 1,000 businesses, 1,000 family businesses like Royal Enfield, and how it can change the color and character of the Indian economy in our lifetime. Now, why our speaker for the day? Because he has seen the impact of Middlestands play out on a global scale, front and center, in his job till the end of last month. Mr. Srini Srinivasan was the Joint Managing Director of Bosch India. In addition to leading core supply chain responsibilities that comprises of over 37,000 team members and 20,000 suppliers from all over the world, he led functional transformation, built new skills and capabilities, incubated new and old suppliers with technological advancements to bring them up to speed with the changes in the automotive industry, and also helped them maximize new opportunities in the mobility sector. Prior to Bosch, for nearly 3 decades, Mr. Srinivasan held 14 diverse roles in strategy, operations, and leadership at Unilever in India, Singapore, and London in various capacities, from leading treasury operations to CFO and VP supply chain for Asia, Africa, Middle East, Turkey, and Russia. Along with spending time as a consultant and as a coach, Mr. Srinivasan has also founded 2 NGOs. First, focused on bringing in education for deprived children through digitization in Ladakh, and the second, battling afforestation in the Himalayas. Just before I quiz Mr. Srinivasan on your behalf, he would like to say a few words to all of the audience members present. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. And thank you very much for having me on this show. It's always a pleasure to engage with a very, I would say, enlightened group of people to provide some perspectives and also to share some of the thoughts. And this whole topic around Middlestand is, I think, very pertinent and also relevant for the times that we see. Why do I say that? Firstly, if you look at it, in the last 2 or 2.5 years of COVID, if you look at what has happened to manufacturing in India, I think it really, it's a question of survival, especially for the many MSMEs that we have. MSME traditionally and for many years has been a neglected lot in a way, if I can say that, not only from a perspective of policy or government intervention or the focus, but also I think it has been to a large extent self-inflicted. We all know that MSME is the backbone of the Indian economy. We have almost 60 million medium and small enterprises in India, employing about 110 million people. And this is almost 40% of the non-farm workforce that we have in India. They are also a critical part of the Indian economy from an export perspective, exporting 48% of our total exports. They contribute almost 25% of the Indian GDP and 33% of total manufacturing output. So the total impact on the Indian economy is not small. However, possibly we could count on our fingers the number of MSMEs that we can call as world-class. Given that sort of a perspective, I would say that all is not lost. There is hope. And it's very important that as we move from survive to revive and thrive, we focus on some of the learnings that we can take from around the world. There are different models, of course, available, and Middlestand is a very time-tested model. And in many ways, the German economy is also highly dependent on the Middlestand in Germany. Almost you can say that 95% of the companies in Germany are Middlestand companies. Only probably 2 to 5% are what I would say the so-called big companies. So they really employ about 60% of the workforce, pay about 65 billion euros in taxes, and hence the German economy, or Germany being an industrial nation, is dependent to a large extent on the output of the Middlestand. Given this sort of a background, even in India, there is an organization which is a task force called Global Alliance of Mass Entrepreneurship, which is really working towards building capability and capacity into the MSMEs in India, because the future is, of course, the corporates will play an important role, but the future of Indian economy to become a 3 trillion economy, or indeed providing employment to the workforce or getting the demographic dividend, will depend on how the MSMEs really thrive. And GAME is doing some excellent work in this. And we, through a combination of government intervention, policy, society, and also MSMEs as a group or a force in forums like CII and FICCI, will have to make a big shift and leverage that collective power to really become world-class. With these some opening remarks, over to you, Tarun, to fire your questions.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the address. Like we mentioned earlier, before Bosch and your immense experience with Unilever, looking back, would you say they are very different types of firms in terms of origin and character? If so, how would you describe them?
So it's a very tricky question, Tarun, because both Unilever and Bosch are very successful companies in their own right, and they are in different sectors who have also sort of stood the test of time and also hold iconic positions in their respective industries. We need to keep in mind that business and innovation systems are embedded in their own respective socio-political, economic, managerial, and also their own cultural context. Of course, Unilever is an Anglo-Dutch company following a certain model, and Bosch is well entrenched in the German mindset and the German way of thinking. Though we all know that the origin of Unilever and Bosch are different, but they are yet somewhat similar if we look at the core purpose. Unilever purpose, as you know, is to make sustainable living a commonplace. That's the reason why Unilever does business. That's the way why Unilever people come to work. At Unilever in its purpose says that it meets the everyday needs of people for nutrition, hygiene, and personal care with brands that help people feel good, look good, and get more out of life. At the same time, if we look at Bosch's purpose is invented for life, and their purpose is to facilitate a connected living, to improve the quality of life worldwide with products and services that are innovative and spark enthusiasm. So at the core, at the highest level, I would say that most companies would have the purpose which is very similar. However, how they go about delivering that purpose in its constitution, in its ownership, in its management structures, in its business model tend to be different. Of course, they are influenced in a certain way by the industry segments they operate. But for a moment, if we just remove the industry segment, or if we just erase that industry segment in which they operate, it will be very interesting. And if you are, especially if you are interested in corporate history, to understand the business models and why they are structured in the way they are. Of course, Unilever is a very market-oriented and also market dynamic listed entity. And Unilever has been in the news in recent times for many reasons, some most welcome, some may not be as welcome. But at the same time, it is also influenced heavily by what the market expectations are, possibly many of them short-term in its thinking. But we also know that long-term is nothing but a series of short-terms, and hence the accountability factor comes in. Whereas Bosch, on the other hand, is a very different, I would say, kettle of fish. Started long time. I mean, I would say that similarly, Unilever and Bosch started almost at the same time between 1834 and 1836. Very interesting. And that's only the coincidence, apart from me being working in two companies. Possibly this is the only other coincidence that is there between Bosch and Unilever. But having said that, they have followed different routes. Unilever following a merger with Uni, which is the margarine company, in, I think, the early 1900s, and then through a spate of acquisition going global. I think the history of Unilever, as you would see, is based out of the, again, socio-political and cultural, about the colonial rule that they had, and hence spreading their wings far and wide early in their history. And also thereby, most of their companies tend to be almost self-governed, you could say, in the early parts. And Unilever, when I joined in 1989, was nothing but the sum of its parts. Each country, each organization being allowed to do and develop their own strategies. And so long as at the end of the year, a fat check was given as dividend, Unilever was happy. Whereas if you look at Robert Bosch started a small company, I think in mid-1800s, 1836, if I'm not mistaken, and then formed it into a corporation. And then later on, it turned out to be a limited liability company, a private enterprise. So making the whole organization private. And then later on in the 1900s, transferring the shareholding into a Stiftung, which is the German word for a foundation. So 92% of the shareholding of Bosch is held by a foundation. 8% out of the 8%, 6% is held by the Bosch family, and 2% is held by the supervisory board. So it's a very unique constellation, I would say. While we may say, so Bosch started as a Middlestand company, and in a moment we'll discuss the traits and the qualities and the ethos of a Middlestand company. But even though Bosch was not family owned in that sense, within inverted commas, it has all the trappings and all the, I would say, the core constitution and the ethos and the principles of a family run company, which is cross-generational. So on one side, you have Unilever, which would have a purpose and a long-term strategy, no doubt, but it is also heavily influenced by the series of short-term, whereas Bosch is very long-term in its thinking. And that's the reason Bosch spends 10%, around 8 to 10% of its turnover on R&D, on technology development. Bosch has, in its own history of some 120 years, Bosch has had 7 CEOs, whereas Unilever would have had a CEO probably every 5 years. So longevity, long-term thinking, long-term strategy, and being accountable for that strategy for long-term, because the CEO of Bosch, after he retires, becomes the chairman of the supervisory board. So he cannot get away, he cannot run away. saying that develop a strategy for somebody else to deliver. So he has to deliver for probably a decade or 2 decades, and then he continues it as the chairman of the supervisory board. And that is again a core principle of what you see in the Middlestand company. So to answer your question, I think it's a very interesting model to compare the two companies. They have similarity of purpose, but a very divergent approach to its execution, partly influenced by the industry segment they are in, but not necessarily. But if you remove the industry segment in which they operate, the approach to execution of the strategy tends to be very different. Yeah.
Because of the kind of starting principles that were laid down by Robert Bosch, is what I'm guessing. And we were talking about family businesses and how Bosch used to be one, then it was institutionalized as the giant that has become today. The footprint of family businesses is in tune 70 to 90% contributing to the annual GDP of our country each and every year. Having a business like Bosch, do you think in some sense they have been a beacon for family businesses? Would you say?
Yes, no doubt. I mean, today, in today's world, family businesses in India, I would say, or for that matter, globally, don't get the recognition they deserve. Almost, you can say, 70% of world GDP, or you take the corporate wealth that is created by family business. The best of the companies you take, which are now so-called listed entities or non-family business, started as a family business, and over a period of time, the family holdings may have got diluted, or there is a separation between ownership and management, and hence the family has gone back or receded back to an ownership role. But you're absolutely true that if you take the German example, or for that matter, if you take the example from Japan or South Korea and a few other leading industrial economies of the world, the family business and the fact that they have built businesses, they have not run businesses. That's a big difference between the two. And the cross-generational commitment and the principles that they have followed in building these businesses across generation, the strong customer relationship that they have built. And I recall a statement which Robert Bosch, the founder, had made. He said that I would rather lose money than trust. And even to this date, this principle sort of steers the way we approach or the customer relationships that we have. So it's very important to say that, yes, the whole concept of family business, cross-generational thinking is in a way, I would say, the benchmark or the foundation of what Germany is today. Traditionally, you say that when you talk about Middlestand, I mean, I think the European Union defines Middlestand as a company which has got about 250 employees. It's got some 50 million of turnover. But today, if you look at statistics, there are many companies. I mean, Bosch itself is not 50 million. It is 100 times the 50 million. It's a $78 billion company with 400,000 employees. But it still prides itself by calling itself a Middlestand because the core values of that company, the principles on which it operates, the cross-generational thinking, even though there is no family to serve, and this is the ethos on which the business is built. And I think here it's very important to understand what are the key tenets of a Middlestand. And typically you would see that ownership, leadership, and management is integrated in a Middlestand, and that drives the principles and the constitution of a Middlestand or a German company in that sense. Whereas in any other company which is a listed entity or a non-family owned, you would find that the ownership and the leadership is differentiated, or indeed the management structures are also different, or they keep changing over a period of time. Whereas That does not happen in a Middlestand. And having said that, this long-term thinking also leads to probably a better sustenance. The sustainability of such an enterprise is more assured in a certain way. We know the examples of Enron, and even the company in Germany, which is the World One or something like that, which was there, which all was hugely negatively impacted by the short-termism. Having said that, when you operate on a Middlestand, and I have worked with many of them, I think you need patience. And having come from Unilever for 27 years, you can say that I had to myself go through a blood transfusion and inject a bit of Middlestand blood into my own circulatory system. You do need and also coming from FMCG and consumer, which is where speed and agility and fast decision making is the name of the game. When you deal with Middlestand or in a Middlestand, you take a pause. You take a pause, and the decisions are taken not from the immediacy of what is required, but from the longer term implications. So I would say that independence and patience are some of the virtues that are also required. As I said earlier, the shareholding and the capital are closely linked. That is also one of the reasons why the technology sort of and the innovation that Germany has achieved, especially whether it is in automotive or steel or many of the industrial era companies. I think this has really paid them great dividends. The entire model of Middlestand has given them great dividends in assuming leadership positions in many of the sectors which Germany is known today. However, I think it remains to be seen that in the fourth revolution, which is the digital revolution, how effectively this model would work, and that is one of the challenge which Middlestand are also going through today. Again, I think if I can name a few, I would say, drivers of the success of the Middlestand, I would say that really the technology power is building the technology power as step by step to really deliver a world-class product. So for any Middlestand, while German industry or German consumer base is the starting point, however, for them the market is the world. But the route to the world is first becoming world-class and then becoming worldwide. And that's why the heading of this discussion, I would say, of this session is also most appropriate, because we are looking at, one is the family business, and the second is how do we become world-class as a route, and these two together, how can this lead us to become worldwide? And therefore, I believe that the family businesses, wherever they are in the world, and especially the learnings for India, to really say that, yes, there is, family business are well positioned in a certain way to really become world-class and worldwide.
We touched upon the aspects of what can be the impact of taking these Middlestand properties and what happens to individual firms once they do it. For example, you mentioned how there have only been 7 CEOs over a period of time. What I understand is with a long tenure like that, the employee will obviously be inclined towards building a longer term relationship, providing the best possible services to the customers, and hence encashing and building upon it in much larger and a much stronger bond amongst it. But let's focus, that was on individual firms. But what about economies? As a business leader of one of the biggest German Mittelstands, would you say that there is a direct cause and effect link between what post-war Germany was and to what it is today, the third largest exporter and the fourth largest economy in the world? Would you say there is a direct cause and effect?
The facts and the figures for post-war Germany says it all. And there is a big learning for India in this as well. Today there are approximately 3.5 million Mittelstand in Germany, and they account for almost, I would say, about 95% of the legal entities, and they sort of almost generate 1/3 of the turnover of all German companies. And they do have a decisive impact on both the economy and the society, I would say, because and they are the key drivers for research, development, and innovation. And why do I say this? Because almost 60% of the employees who want a career, who want social security, who want the fullness of their own education, and this is cross-generational, and the German Mittelstand provides that, and that's why the German Mittelstand is so important to the fundamental of post-war Germany. So from that perspective, I would say that yes, from an economic perspective, across industry, and this is not only from an automotive perspective, but I know, for example, companies like Simrise or industries in I would say people who are making lenses or in chemical industry. I know many companies who have really built world-class businesses. These businesses tend to be either making manufacturing parts or components or even the final product. And that's where they closely align themselves with the customer and solving customers' problem, going wherever customers goes, whichever parts of the geography the customer goes. It's almost like a train the Mittelstand companies would follow. And that provides them the seat, a permanent seat on the table. It's almost like the UN Security Council. You have a permanent seat on the table. So the German customers who would be there would not think of anybody else when they are going and setting up a business in any other emerging market or other parts of the world. The Mittelstand company would be there investing its own capital. Of course, there's a very strong symbiotic relationship between the main company or the tier one company and the Mittelstand, and you can see that yes, this cross pollination of I would say ownership also happens at time when the main company is also taking a small stake in the Mittelstand, and that brings the commitment as well. And this drives the strategy for the Mittelstand itself. The long-term thinking and the commitment makes them really invest in technology, in innovation and capability, process efficiency at the deepest level. They don't look at short-term profits. They look at returns over a long period of time, because their own owners and stakeholders are also long-term thinking. So this symbiotic thinking between management and ownership in terms of long-term value creation really drives this engine of being world-class, and being world-class enables them to go worldwide. They are, though the economy in various parts of the world is not necessarily like Germany, the volatility, and especially in current environment, what we call as the VUCA world, affects these companies across the world. But yes, yet the fact that they are almost, they are attached to the big companies. They don't tend to be directly playing in B2C segment. They are mostly B2B players, but their own fortunes are very closely linked to the main company. And they know that, yes, long-term value creation will happen. And given that sort of a framework, I would say that they also are a very strong force in government, in policy making, in development of new technologies, or for that matter, development of areas, of rural economies and others. And a key element, if many of you have visited Germany, you would have observed that many of this Mittelstand, you would be driving through Black Forest, enjoying the beauty and the nature. But somewhere down, somewhere in some rural part where you stop for a beer, you'll find that, hey, that seems to be some manufacturing company here. Believe me, these German companies are absolutely media shy. Having worked in a In an Anglo-Dutch company, even before they produce anything, there is a PR angle that is always precedes them. But the German companies are hugely media shy. You won't even know. But once you go and inquire and find out, you would see that this is a company which is number one or number two or number three in the world in what they do and what they produce. So I think a key element, therefore, is that these guys, Middlestand, are dotted all over Germany in rural part, and by virtue of their location, they almost adopt the village. Almost, you can say 90% of the village works for the company, and of course, you need 10% to drive the cars and serve you beer. So you can't have 100% working for the company. Otherwise, who would serve you the famous German beer? So, but 90% and across generations, this is what happens. So the father has worked for the company, the grandfather has worked for the company, and when the son comes of age, he goes into a technical institute, which is also started by the Middlestand in the same village. He doesn't go to university and does engineering, 4 years engineering, where he's having a good time, and when he passes out, he can't get a job, like in most places in India. But there he does a technical training and then joins the same company. And also the process of learning is continuous. The most experienced, and I myself experienced when I was in Germany, many people who are probably one or two levels above the lowest level of worker, they are doctorates in their area. They are PhDs. They have their own patents, and they love what they do, and they are called Meisters. Meisters in India, probably nobody remembers Meisters, but in old tailoring shops, when the guy used to cut the cloth, I mean, there could be 10 people who will finally do the stitching, but the Meister will be cutting the cloth based on the measurement that he takes. So that concept of Meister is there in the Middlestand, who is the numero uno, who's the expert in that particular area, who's ensuring process efficiency, who's ensuring productivity and quality, and also in the process training a whole cadre of talent that is coming year after year. So having said that, this is almost like a recipe for success, which the Middlestand have put together, which is a combination of ownership, leadership, management structure, talent, training, adopting the entire ecosystem, and then thinking cross-generational, and that's what delivers the success, and Middlestand being the foundation of the German economy.
That's absolutely true. We touched upon how it has panned out in Germany, and we touched about some aspects of how it pans out when it is applied to individual organizations. But what about the rest of the world in this context? Would you say, like you were mentioning about Japan and South Korea earlier, would you say Mittelstands have had this similar kind of an impact on these economies as well?
This is a very interesting question, and there have been many research discussions, and we ourselves have discussed over beer to say that, yes, why isn't Middlestand, or is Middlestand global in that sense? But I think the whole concept of Middlestand, it's a concept, first of all. It's not a formula. And hence there is a bit of, I would say, art also in it involved, which is also linked to the society and the culture of the particular country which has brought this together. The concept of Middlestand works well when there is a small and medium enterprise coming together, which is really has to be in a symbiotic relationship with the different stakeholders to make the business a success. And that's what, and of course, that includes policy, government, and all of that as well. And that's what makes a Middlestand a success. While Middlestand, there are forms of Middlestand, I would say, even in India. In my own experience and some of the supply base that we have had have adopted the Middlestand model in their own small way, or some of the German companies. I mean, we have formed a joint venture with one of the Middlestand in India, and very successfully. and they are trying to adopt and bring some of the ethos of Middlestand. But if you look at Japan and Korea, there are other forms. They may not be a like-to-like replica, but for example, if you look at the Keiretsu model, again, a large elements of what you see in a Middlestand is also you would see in a Keiretsu model. Again, these are family owned, where ownership and leadership and management is absolutely integrated, extremely close to the customer relationship. So for example, if you take the Hyundai in South Korea, or the Toyota or the Mitsubishi, these are the big mega industries in the respective countries, and they have a whole lot of Middlestand-like companies, which they call as the Keiretsu, which they go along. So if you talk about Toyota production systems, all of the Keiretsu within the Toyota system will follow the same principles. So there is a very integrated supply chain network that works. And similarly, when many of these big industrial houses move across the world, lock, stock, and barrel, the entire Keiretsu will move. And you would see that, I mean, very close to Bangalore in Anantapur, where the Kia has set up its, I mean, right, they come bag and baggage, right from not only the Keiretsu and the supplier base, but the restaurant, groceries, and everything follows them. So this is nothing but maybe in a different term, but Middlestand in a certain sense, to say that yes, how do you write from a big machine or a big component to a pin? How do you bring the same principles, the same quality mindset, the same productivity levels to drive world-class performance? And that's the ethos with either the Middlestand or Keiretsu, whichever you say, tries to bringing. The model is slightly different also in Keiretsu, to say that many a time there is a bank or there is some other financer in between. There are a lot of cross holdings and others. But I think at a larger, at a higher principle level, they are similar models, though in a different name.
Talking about this integration and the benefits, if you would say, towards the suppliers, and this loyalty that lies with the suppliers. I remember you talking about Bosch and the suppliers and how they behave with their suppliers and how they make sure that they do everything to establish a long-term relationship, not just that, enable them to strive higher and uplift their technological advancements, if you would say. Could you please shed some light on that, about the relationship that Bosch establishes with their suppliers? That would be a very good example for or how a Middlestand interacts with their ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, if you see the Middlestand model and the industries in which they have operated, they tend to be high technology, high precision engineering, high quality, zero defect, and these are some of the key drivers for success. I'm not saying that consumer is not high quality or high standards of manufacturing, but in the industries in which the Middlestand operate, the investments tend to be extremely high. So whether if you talk about a steel industry or high precision industry, or for that matter, automotive, and when I talk of investment, I'm talking of the entire value chain. So in such a supply chain, even a small pin, a high precision pin or a nut or a bolt can stop the entire line. And a line stoppage for 1 hour will cost $1 million. So given that sort of a perspective, as they say, I think there is a saying we say that a war can be lost because of a loose pin in a horse's shoe. So similarly for Bosch, we may be having 60-70% market share around the world. But I have myself faced, especially during this COVID time, where a small part, which is the size of a button, has stopped lines in our plant during this COVID period. And we have had a struggle. We used to manufacture it, put it in a taxi, within taxi, and take it to Jaipur. And then finally, just before the shift is going to start, the material is delivered. But this is definitely not the supply chain for a 78 billion euro conglomerate that we should be having. But having said that, the principles are similar to say that Bosch has to adopt the entirety of its supply chain to be successful. And therefore, whether it is Bosch production systems or the line walks that we have, our own people will visit the supplier regularly, do line walks, looking at operating efficiency, quality standards, because we run an international production network. Manufacturing parts could come from anywhere in India and anywhere in the world. And hence, resilience of that supply chain, standards of that supply chain, ensuring the competencies and skills of that supply chain becomes extremely important. So in your supply chain network, the ownership may be different, but the standards of performance, the competencies, the skills, the production systems have to be exactly the same as what you would be having. And that's what the Middlestand also ensures. Middlestand also delivers. And that also talks about, I would say, mindset. Middlestand is also a mindset. And I think there is a lot of learning for the larger MSME industry in India to really say that how do you build yourself to be world-class?
We spoke about the world in general and the extracts or variants of Middlestands that exists all over the world. But what about these high standards in employee? We discussed about customer relationships. We discussed about external stakeholder relationships. We talked about a character trait like ensuring highest of product qualities. What do all of these characteristics mean for India? We touched about it slightly in the beginning. But given the fact that we know that we are a nation that has led with low costs, we are labeled as people who believe in quick profits. And more often than not, we are not really the people who have trustworthy commitments in general, which is why stereotypical statements like a global single malt cannot come from India. Stereotypes like that exist. What would you say would be the implications of what Middlestands are known for, and how will it play out if that is imbibed, given the fact that we are known for these character traits that we would rather distance ourselves from?
I mean, in my own career for about now 36 years, almost 1/3 of the time I have spent outside of India. And hence, based on some understanding, I do believe that the socio-political framework and the infrastructure, the dynamism also influences how you operate. In India, if you want to go from point A to point B, you have a plan A, you have a plan B, or you have a plan C. And in a certain way, we call it entrepreneurship. But I would also, you could also call it dissipated energy, which is focusing on multiple things rather than getting one thing right, to say that you want to go from A to B. And that also sort of triggers a mindset of being risk averse, because you are not putting your full might behind that well thought through plan or strategy. You're always thinking that, yes, something could go wrong. I may not get my money, so I hold back something. And then finally, you deliver a product which is suboptimal. But having said that, there is no doubt that there are many examples that I have myself seen, whether it's in the consumer goods industry or in Bosch, where the entrepreneurship and the zeal and the passion has also led to great commitment to becoming world-class. And many of the points that I mentioned is also seen there. I mean, let me highlight a few of them. Typically, I would say that there are great examples, which I would call them, but I would call them islands of excellence, even in India, where you have the right mindset, which is again long-term and cross-generational. Today, the biggest struggle which I when I talk to owners or entrepreneurs of my generation, the biggest challenge they face is on succession planning, especially linked to manufacturing. The new generation kids in their 20s who come back after having a degree in the US or UK or wherever, they don't find it attractive enough to be in a manufacturing or a metal bashing industry. They want to go everything they want to do digital. It's almost like not trying to find a solution to a problem, but a problem trying to find a solution, or the other way around. So I think a key element for us, the learning that needs to come is that I always believe that an entrepreneur is a person where the resources are always less than the ambition that you have, or the ambition is far ahead of the resources you have, and hence you really sweat out the resources you have. You think long term, you put the foundations and the building blocks for long-term value creation. Whereas a short-term sattabaji, if I can say that, will be all about saying that, okay, I somehow manage the resources here and there, make my fast buck, always keep my foot on two boats to say that, yes, come when it's needed, I can always make a quick exit. And that's also, I would say, is being accentuated in many cases with the startup culture, where the horizon itself is 4 years, 5 years, and then making your money and living happily ever after. But at least I can say that with my experience, business cannot deliver value in that manner. A 5-year horizon cannot deliver the value. But at the same time, it's important that when you talk about value, it is not value to yourself, but value to the person who's also going to come and acquire the business. That is very important. So I would say that the right thing is that focus on the right things, profits will come. Glue yourself to your customer, and always be obsessive about solving customers' problem. I have myself experienced not only when Bosch with its customers, whether it's Daimler or BMW, or for that matter, Mahindra or Tata Motors, the customer's problem is your problem. If the customer calls, you leave whatever you are doing to attend to the customer. Always understand that Bosch does not pay your salary. The customer pays your salary. So that mindset, that orientation right from day one will ensure that you are always thinking in the mindset of the customer. And that will give you the seat on the table. You will be part of the innovation program which the customer, or the platform which the customer is building. So many of our entrepreneurs who are there, the MSMEs who are there, who are in B2B space, really being obsessive about customer and knowing the customer on 360 degrees is a key element of our own success. I think the second one I would say is that before we get into a business or a venture, carefully select the sector, the product, and the customer segment you want to operate. Many a case, people say it's all a chalta hai attitude. I think there is some money to be made. My grandfather said this, my uncle said this. Two people over a beer decided something and say, okay, let's get into this venture. The spontaneity and the entrepreneurship is good, but many a time it will also misfire. So I think being pessimistic, being critically evaluating the sector in which you want to operate becomes extremely important. And there, I think thinking long-term and what differentiates you from others and really putting those building blocks in place is very, very important. And there being ruthless about this is very important. And that's why you will find that many of the Middlestand, even when we talk to them and say, here is a new product, why don't you come and set it up? An Indian entrepreneur would first immediately say yes to it and then figure out how to do it. Whereas the Middlestand will never commit. He will do engineering, he will do sample, he will do sample 1, 2, 3, perfect that art. And then he will say that, yes, I'm ready to be with you for the long term. I would also say that invest in people. I mean, many of the supply base which I've got into. I mean, honestly, I am amazed as to how they even survive, because they are having machines which are some 70, 80 years old. They run more on the willpower of the operator rather than any technology or maintenance or anything, or for that matter, the safety or the productivity or operating efficiency. They're just on ICU all the time. But the whole investment cycle about technology upgradation is something which is lacking. And at the same time, I would say building talent, the meisters, which I talked about a little bit earlier, is something that is fundamental to a success. Because what happens is that it's quite possible that the guy who started the business, the entrepreneur, the first generation entrepreneur, had all the concepts, the skills and capability. But when it moves to the next generation, the whole business will collapse, because we have not created the cadre of experienced talent and capabilities and operators. And hence investing in people and competencies across meisters and cadres becomes very important. I also believe that big businesses are built around processes which are run by talented people, rather than to say that it is run by world-class people with I would say, for want of any other word, terrible processes. That will not work, and it will just cause more frustration. And I see that many a time. Indians don't believe in process. And we call the so-called can-do attitude. And we used to credit young talent who says that screw the process, this guy is entrepreneurial, he can circumvent the process and deliver. It can happen once or twice, but it's not something that is sustainable. And you will face the after effects of that, and it will also come and hit your P&L. And last but not the least, I also believe benchmark, because getting into an altruism mode, saying that I have built a business of 100 crores, 200 crores, and I'm making a profit of 20 crores in that, and I have arrived in life, is only a recipe for disaster. The end of every business starts when the business is most successful. So I'm a firm believer which says that only the paranoid survive. So self-evaluating yourself all the time to benchmarking, having the right experts and independent experts to come and evaluate our businesses with world-class benchmarks is a very important element for our success. So these are the foundations on what a Middlestand is built, and they replicate this model wherever they go in the world. So if at all our entrepreneurs in India, of course, the government and the ecosystem, all that will have to help. But I think the first step starts with, if it is to be, it's up to me.
There's what you talked about earlier right now is the short-term 3 to 4 year ownership and then selling the organization off, making a buck. And you redefined happily ever after for me in this conversation right now. But if we set them aside, what about the genuine entrepreneurial spirit? Apologies, the coffee hasn't kicked in yet. In the country that it is right now, in your experience, what can businesses in very early stages of their journeys learn from the world-class family-run businesses like Bosch used to be in their early days? What comparative advantages do you think these self-imposed high standards mean for them in terms of business metrics like pricing? Can they charge more from their customers, or are customers ready to pay more for their services? Are they going to be able to get the next distributor in the next expansion phase much easier as a result of these high standards? What would you say is the correlation between these setting these high standards, living by them, and direct deliverable business metrics?
I think you're right. Again, depending upon carefully choosing the product or segment in which you want to operate, and spending huge amount of time in evaluating your own source of competitive advantage as to why are you differentiated, why will you be world-class, what are those tenets that you need to build as a foundation. I think focusing on that is very important. I think the gestation period, of course, the environment itself does not allow you to start business based on regulation and the forms that you have to fill. But I think the homework that is required, the groundwork that is required in putting the team together, in conceptualizing the whole process that will be that needs to be adopted to get to world class. I think spending a huge amount of time around some of these elements to really say that what are the production standards, what are the quality standards, what are the what level of talent that will be required, what's the training process that is required, how do you deliver vertical ramp up, how do you get into a zero defect sort of a mindset. These sort of elements are very important. And if you go to any Middlestand, and we are talking of Middlestand who are amongst the top 3 or 5 in the world, and you will find the volumes of operating procedures, everything is documented. Whereas in India, 99.9% tends to be in somebody's mind. So if somebody says that hamara chacha ka bhatija ka sala ka shadi hai, so then the whole technology concept and how things to be done goes with him. So getting these fundamentals right is so important, so important. And practically I faced this during our COVID period when unfortunately many people had to go back to their hometown and whatever. The entire production system will stop because somebody doesn't know how to put a nut to something or something else happened. So I think spending the crucial 2 to 3 years that may be required in fundamentally setting that business, it is a cash burn time. It is a lot of hard work, but that payback for that will come hugely in the years to come. And I would say that the second most important element is building your team. And this is not a start process at the startup process, but very important at every stage to build that cadre. And for that, investing in your own, I would say, training framework. I mean, we have the ITIs in so-called ITIs in India, but that may not be sufficient. But to really build world-class training capability to get cadres of talent through that process, then you will see that the entire process takes over, and the high quality talent, it's a dream run that you would have. And align yourself with global customers right from day one. This is not about low cost. This is not about sending a product and making the customer happy, and then afterwards giving all sorts of stories as to why something didn't happen. But aligning yourself with global customers, developing relationships right from day one, participating in global exhibitions and conferences, getting the visibility that is required, bringing some of the experts which are there globally, or for that matter, that global experts who are there in India today, and bring them as an advisory board. These are some of the, I would say, very simple yet very important elements or foundation elements to emulate how Middlestand have been so successful.
Just before we close, if you were to go back in time and visit your previous experiences and the companies that you have had them with, do you think even multinationals can learn from the early days of businesses like Bosch's and the other Middlestands of the world, amongst all the other examples that you also talked about?
Definitely, yes. I mean, I've not worked in any other multinational other than Unilever, and it's an interesting question again, considering that Unilever has been in the news of late, and investors are also questioning the strategy and performance and all of that. I think I can possibly share 2 or 3 learnings for multinational in general. I think one is that being a listed company brings its own challenges of market expectation, quarterly pressures, which quite naturally forces the top management to short-term thinking, which would often prevent them by doing the right thing and taking the right call, which is not there in a family-run business or, for that matter, a Middlestand, and hence bringing that understanding of long-term value creation bringing that understanding of having a group of investors who are looking to long-term value rather than short-term returns is an integral part of your overall strategy, which many of the multinationals have to adopt. I remember that many of the multinationals have also done so because especially when Paul Polman became the CEO of Unilever, he stopped giving quarterly guidance. Earlier, Unilever used to give quarterly guidance. This whole thing about quarterly guidance, then throughout the quarter, you are just running to meet that expectation by hook or crook, irrespective of what happens in the environment outside. So I think really that is, I would say, in a way, starting point. So the second element is what I learned from Bosch also is that delivering purpose to impact takes time. I mean, today, every company has got a purpose statement, but delivering that purpose to impact takes time. So, for example, if you talk about sustainable living, nutrition, hygiene, and health, it will require decades to make an impact on some of these. So the question, therefore, is that how are you accountable to all your stakeholders on your purpose statement? How are you putting forward a sort of a balance sheet or an annual report which shows your accountability or the impact that you have made on nutrition, the impact that you have made on sustainability, the impact that you have made on improving hygiene or human development index and others, is also equally important as much as we provide the returns or analysis on financial returns and share price and others. So the purpose to impact statement and having clear KPIs that measure the progress of top management on there is also important, and will also, I would say, measure the success of any multinational or company. Third, I would say that Bosch is owned by a foundation. So, I mean, if you say that, yes, the profits of the company are either plowed back into the company or invested back in social causes. Whereas any other enterprise or a listed entity will have an external shareholder to whom they are accountable for. But having said that, what I said earlier, the returns to all the stakeholders and how are we being accountable for that is a key element, and adopting that nurturing ecosystem and accountability to the stakeholder at large is a key element. Having said that, I don't think the Middlestand model is the be-all and end-all. It has got its own fallacies. Even in Germany today, people are hotly debating the future of Middlestand in the new context. And that's where in the starting itself, I said the socio-economic context is very important. The business context is very important for any model to thrive. And hence, each of these models will have to be reinventing itself to be able to deliver that virtuous cycle of value creation and wealth creation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Srinivasan, for that. We would like to start with the question and answers. And the first question that comes to us is from Mr. Amish Nathwani. The essence of what he is asking is that inside of a family-run business, since all of the major decision makers are within the family itself, isn't that a very big contrast to what happens to a non-family business where a large section of the decision makers come from different sections, different experiences, different backgrounds? What he's asking about is, how would you tackle the fact that all the decision makers are from inside the family, therefore probably not as versatile in their exposures as compared to what happens inside of a decision-making meeting of a non-family business, where there are multiple different angles and different approaches coming simply because the backgrounds of the individuals are quite different from one another?
Very good question. In my experience, in the Middlestand, you have probably the brothers managing the business in a certain way, and they have a very good understanding of the business they are in, the sectors, the segment, the production processes, and others. But however, with the environment changing outside, the technology changing outside, they may find some elements lacking. And there you always find that the Middlestand has got a set of advisors who fill in this gap of the so-called expertise. They are not necessarily, they are not, I mean, of course, at a lower levels, you have professionals operating the respective functions or areas and others, but the Middlestand always has got an external board. So similarly, if you look at Bosch, Bosch, if you classify it as a Middlestand, has got a supervisory board, which has got people from different experience and talent and others. So, and again, even the CEO of Bosch becomes the chairman of the supervisory board. So there is a good mix of expertise coming from not only internal talent and professionals, but also the advisory board who are there either on the supervisory board or an advisory board. And the Middlestand owners are extensively linked up with what's happening in the external world. It's not a case that the family, just because it's family run, they are all inward looking. No, that's not the case. They are extensively measuring themselves. They are extensively tracking as what's happening in technology and what the development is happening. And in this, I would say that the government also plays a big role. And that's why if you look at, especially in Germany, the Messe, the big exhibition and the forums that Germany invites from people from all over the world across industries is indeed a forum for many of these people to come and understand what's happening. So it's a sort of an orchestra. It's a synchronized orchestra, which is the government, the industry bodies, and the Middlestand themselves are running to be holding that position of being number one or number two in the respective industries.
Understood. The second question is from Jonan. Middlestand, since they are such an amazing innovation model and they're driven by SMEs, but how would players like these compare on a global scale and win or even measure on the same scales as their global counterparts with such constraints on their resources, such constraints on the environment that they are starving in, and basically the early stage in the business that they're in?
So firstly, we must remember that Middlestand, they may start in the starting times, they may be local or having the scope within the German industry. But today, every Middlestand is world-class and worldwide. Yeah, worldwide. That doesn't mean that they would have manufacturing operations in 100 countries. No, that's not the case. But their operations or their impact or their sales, their customers are global. And we are not talking of Middlestand who are number one in Germany or Europe. We're talking of Middlestand who are either are amongst the top three in the segment in which they operate at a worldwide level. In a way, you can also say that the German government and also has a bit of protectionism to really foster many of these, because success breeds success. And it's a two-way street, because the German economy is dependent on this Middlestand, and hence the Middlestand is also dependent on the government to facilitate and enable many of these things. And that's where, whether it is in quality or whether it's in technology or talent, Middlestand are in no way lesser to any of their global counterparts. It's quite possible that whether it's in Brazil or in Bolivia, you could have one company which is really shining for whatever reason. But as a Middlestand, hundreds of companies which are really moving in a very structured manner and capturing the world number 1, 2, 3 position, you see that only in Germany.
Yeah. The last question comes from Mr. Brian Papali. Would it be right to state that apart from the standards, technological alignments, and other factors, there would be a need to be a very deep match in between the value system of the suppliers and the employees for a Middlestand to succeed?
Absolutely. And I can give my own example, I would say, in a way, that when I decided to move from Unilever to another company, the fact that Bosch is owned by a foundation, the fact that Bosch is long-term in its thinking, the fact that Bosch is spending 10% of its turnover on R&D, the fact that Bosch files 20,000 patents, global patents every year. And this is all linked to the value systems and beliefs and the long-term thinking which is there in the company. And that motivated me to sort of join such a company. Having said that, even in Middlestand, what is an employee or a youngster coming out of college or whatever education looking for? He wants empowerment, he wants autonomy, he wants a learning, and the Middlestand gives him all of this, and he also has the opportunity to travel around the world because the Middlestand is global and they have an international production network where those experts and meisters will be traveling around the world, setting up capacities, efficiency, and bring that expertise. So it's a huge, I would say that, career motivating factor for any person. And yet you can be in your own village. You can have the beer where you don't have to uproot yourself and your family thousands of miles away to have a fulfilling career. And I think that that sort of a recipe of success is something that the Middlestand has been able to concoct, if I can say that.